This ruler is revered as a near divine being by his entire nation, yet something about him feels deeply wrong. So as I design him, every decision has to balance two forces, divinity and its distortion, and by the end, we'll see whether those two ideas can coexist in a single character or not. But before I start designing, let's establish who this character actually is. The Vakron is one of the major figures in a comic I'm currently developing. He rules a vast empire as both king and deity, and because belief shapes reality in this world, generations of worship have transformed him into something far larger than any human should be. To make this design work, I needed to capture 4 ideas. He has to look like a ruler, he has to look like a religious authority, he has to feel divine, and most importantly, he has to feel unnaturally swollen and distorted. Out of those 4, divine was by far the trickiest. It's easy to say a character should feel divine, but what does it actually look like? Looking across different cultures, divine figures often share a few visual traits. They're elevated above ordinary people, surrounded by symbolism, larger than life, and presented as something to admire rather than question. Since the Vakron is worshipped as a representative of the gods, those became the foundation of the design. With the design goals established, I jumped into rough sketches. At this stage, I'm not worried about quality, I'm looking for ideas. After a few starting sketches, I took a step back and focused on the main problem at hand. The Vakron's body is the entire point of the character, so before I worried about clothing or details, I focused on the silhouette. Eventually, I landed on a silhouette that felt appropriately unnatural, massive, bulbous, and far enough removed from real human proportions to create a sense of unease. And that distortion isn't just aesthetic. In this world, belief influences reality. The Vakron's people see him as grander than life itself, so over time that's exactly what he became. With the body established, the next challenge was clothing. How do you dress someone who needs to feel divine, royal, and unsettling at the same time? To start, I looked at the visual language of kings and priests. Both use layered garments, elaborate silhouettes, and symbols of authority. So I combined elements from each and pushed them into something more unique. One symbol kept appearing throughout every iteration. This is the central religious symbol of the setting. Its role is roughly comparable to a cross or crescent and star in our world, so weaving it throughout the design helped reinforce the Vakron's role as both ruler and religious figure. Then I stumbled onto one of my favorite ideas in the entire design. If the Vakron is worshipped as a divine figure, why not build that divinity directly into his silhouette? So I split the back of his mantle into 2 wing-like forms. Quite a cunning idea, I must say. From the front, only the tips are visible, creating the impression of angelic wings without literally attaching wings to him. By this point, a new problem emerged. The design looked divine, but it didn't look wrong enough. Most of the distortion I had built into the body was hidden beneath the clothing, so the character was starting to lose the tension that made the concept interesting. To fix that, I pushed the asymmetry much further, twisting the silhouette and breaking up the balance often associated with holy imagery. Not only did it make him more unsettling, it also reinforced the swollen, unnatural proportions I wanted from the beginning. At this point, the overall direction finally felt right. The Vakron looked powerful, divine, and just a little disturbing. The last thing he needed was a scepter to reinforce his status. The rough sketches had already established the overall direction, but now came the real test. Would the design still communicate the same ideas once it was cleaned up and viewed up close? I started by redrawing the character properly and defining the details that had only been hinted at in the sketches. Once that was done, a new challenge emerged. What color palette could communicate both divinity and distortion at the same time? Certain colors naturally feel regal, sacred, or powerful. Others feel sickly, unnatural, or corrupted. The challenge was finding a balance between those 2 extremes without losing either side of the concept. After experimenting with different options, I settled on a pale blue skin tone. It gave the Vakron an unhealthy appearance while still feeling distinct enough to separate him from an ordinary person. For the clothing, I chose a desaturated purple. Purple has long been associated with royalty and status, making it a natural fit for a ruler who stands above an entire nation. To reinforce that sense of authority, I paired it with gold for the crown and halo. At this point, the individual colors worked, but the design as a whole still felt disconnected. The skin, clothing, and accessories all communicated the right ideas, yet they weren't visually supporting each other. So I introduced additional colors to bridge the gap between different parts of the design and create a more unified palette. I also pushed the yellow fur towards a dirtier greenish tone, and not only did it help tie the colors together, but it also reinforced the sickly quality that runs throughout the entire design. With the colors established, I moved on to a quick facial study. The Vakron's body had already become distorted through the belief believe of his people, so I wanted to explore how those same proportions would affect his expressions. Notice a smile only a mother could love. At this point, the design itself was essentially finished. With the design finalized, there was one last thing left to figure out. Could the Vakron actually command the presence I had been building throughout the entire design process? A character sheet can communicate ideas, but a finished illustration is where those ideas are truly put to the test. So I began by searching for a scene worthy of someone worshipped as both king and deity. And what might that be? A throne. Not only because it represents political authority, but because thrones have long been associated with something greater than ordinary leadership. They can represent kings, saints, gods, and tyrants alike, which made it the perfect stage for the Vakron. With the composition established, I moved on to lighting. And this would ultimately determine whether the image felt merely regal or genuinely divine. I wanted the viewer's eyes to be drawn immediately towards his face and halo, so I placed him beneath a partially obscured light source, allowing the brightest light to fall directly onto the most important part of the image. The result creates a sense of reverence at first glance, but hopefully the longer you look, the more the feeling begins to shift. Once the lighting was established, all that remained was refining and rendering the image. And after balancing divinity and distortion through every stage of the process, here is the final result. Thank you for watching. Let me know if you'd like to see more character design videos from this world or in general in the future. Bye bye.